What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another first look draft video, and today we are sticking in the cornerback position but going to the Pac-12. So let's get it started.
This is what I live for. Big matchups, it's always fun, so it brings the best out of people.
Welcome everybody to a video. Glad you guys are here, and we're back with another one of these draft videos. This is supposed to be basically like our last video where we took a look at Joey Porter Jr. Same type of format, and as I said in that video, let me know down in the comments below who we should do a video on next. Now, there are a few players I'm kind of planning to do regardless, some of the top potential prospects in this year's draft, but also the final grades for these players and many others will be on DoseOfDion.com. So I do want to point that out there. Link is in the description, or you can just look it up. It's currently being updated, but it will continue to be updated as we get closer to the draft. So a lot of players that will be over there will not be made videos. However, some of these top players I think we just have to do a video of because they could be the Lions' potential top pick in this year's draft. And if you're not a Lions fan, you probably are, but if you're not, it's cool. We're going to talk about this player, so he could fit your team as well. Today, we're taking a look at cornerback Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon. Now, this could be, as I said, the top cornerback taken in this year's draft. And I'm going to give my first look thoughts on this player, diving into his film from this past year and maybe beyond that as well. Let's do it, man. Who is Christian Gonzalez? Let's dive into some of the numbers, and then I'll talk about what I saw on the film. So let's start there. Christian Gonzalez actually has the exact same height listed as we saw with Joey Porter Jr. at about 6'1.5", 201 pounds, so good size there. He's only 20 years old. He has played now in 3 seasons at the college football level. He started his college career with Colorado, where he originally committed as a 4-star recruit. He was ranked number 26 at his position, and he actually started in all 6 games as a freshman. Remember that 2020 season was the COVID year, so it was a shortened season. Move forward to 2021, again with Colorado, started in all 12 games, and then this past year he transferred to Oregon following his cornerbacks coach, and also because of the opportunity that kind of presented itself. Yes, it is at a school that's maybe a little bit more prestigious, and how many draft picks they have put out recently, maybe not historically, but recently. Oregon needed a top cornerback, and he basically plugged in and became that immediately for them. Wright went off to the NFL, James transferred to Auburn, and again his cornerbacks coach went there, so it just made a ton of sense. He started 12 games this past year, so no really injury to note of within those 3 seasons. Started all of those games this past season, and he put up some really good numbers, and now he has a lot of hype heading into this offseason. So you take a look at the stats there, 418 total coverage snaps according to Sports Info Solutions, and as you can also see, those are his coverage stats as a whole below that. Now I want to touch on these really quickly because it does give you some background knowledge on some of the film that I saw and just something to keep in mind as we go through that. So when in entirety, his coverage snaps from this past year, they had him listed in 418 coverage snaps where he allowed 20 receptions on 42 targets. However, only 33 of those were deemed catchable, giving up 247 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, but also having 4 interceptions, probably the first big difference that you see there between him and Joey Porter Jr. 7 passes defended, 1 defensive pass interference that was for 15 yards, and then he had 1 dropped interception. Now again, we broke this down into also man coverage and zone coverage. This does not include goal line. This does not include screen coverage, just man coverage and zone coverage in terms of cover 1, cover 0, cover 2 man for man coverage. And as you can see his stats in 106 coverage snaps, which is, yes, clearly less than the amount of zone coverage snaps that he played. He gave up 10 receptions on 18 targets. However, only 13 of those were actually deemed catchable. 129 yards receiving, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and only 1 pass defended according to SIS. Meanwhile, in zone coverage, again, not taking a look at goal line or taking a look at screens, so 2, 3, 4, and 6, 228 coverage snaps played, where he only allowed 9 receptions on 21 targets. 17 of those were deemed catchable, so even if you just take a look at the catchable stats, that's basically about 50% of the passes thrown his way in zone were completed for 107 passing yards, 1 touchdown, and 4 interception, and 5 passes defended. So as you just see by that alone, a majority of his production in coverage has come from zone coverage, which is usually the case. Don't get guys that make tons of plays on the football when they're consistently playing man coverage, at least in terms of interceptions. Last season, I touched on this in the last video, but there were only 2 players, according to Pro Football Focus, that actually had 2 or more interceptions in the past season when in man coverage. So you don't get a lot of those. This player, definitely a little bit different than Joey Porter Jr. I would say very different. I mean, I think that's kind of immediate when you start to watch this player. Just in the play style alone of how he wins and what he does well and what he necessarily doesn't do well. What are his strengths, what are his weaknesses, they seem pretty clear. Even though he has good size, just like Joey Porter Jr., they're play style seems completely different. And on top of that, I don't know what Christian Gonzalez's arm length is, and I don't know what Joey Porter Jr.'s arm length is, but it seems like Joey has much longer arms. Either way, the point is, let's start with the press, because while, as you saw, he didn't have as many man coverage snaps, he definitely took his fair share of press coverage reps, really against pretty much every team that I saw. Now, you had games like the Utahs where you started to see him kind of align in the slot. It was nice to see that flexibility within his game and really get to just judge that. But there were plenty of press snaps, any different teams, the Cows, the Georgias to open the season. So in press coverage, what did I take away? Pretty much in every part defensively for him in coverage, but specifically in press coverage as well, is about 3 things here that I really like. First off, his pad level. He plays with fantastic pad level, knee bend. He rarely pops up. It's very tough to transfer his weight as an offensive player to get him off balance. On top of that, he also plays with extremely quick feet, something that I love within his game. He moves with ease, very quick feet, and then on top of that, that leads to a great transition ability to open up and run and match tons of different releases, a speed release to just get in your hip with the acceleration and have no problems. One thing that definitely flew through my mind as I was taking notes from pretty much every game that he played in this past season was it was very difficult to find plays where he was beat off the line, meaning he was beat off the line and then you would see the receiver would have a step on him over top. Like, that almost never happened. It was like there's a few examples of maybe there he got beat. It was so rare, and it was rare with Joey Porter Jr. because he could control routes really well, but it was so rare with Christian Gonzalez from a press to be beat. And I guess he had less coverage snaps in this situation than a guy like Joey Porter Jr., but my goodness, it just never seemed to happen. Now, with that being said, going back and forth here, one thing that I don't necessarily love about Christian Gonzalez, but I feel like this can easily be worked on, is I do feel like he can be a little bit predictable in the way that he's going to play a receiver based on how the receiver attacks him. So he is susceptible to being set up by some very crafty receivers. But with that being said, because of his excellent athleticism and body control and pad level and bend within his game, he's difficult. He is difficult to shake, and even when he's in some awkward positions, the recovery, the twitch that he showcases, I think there was a great example against Georgia with the little hesitation, the stop and then go, and he was able to still stick with the route pretty darn well, kind of showcased all of that. Most of the time is playing an inside leverage on the outside. When he's playing as an outside corner, a majority of the time he's lined up in inside leverage. You did get the snaps where he played straight up. It really didn't get any outside leverage snaps, but majority of the time he played inside leverage, which, yes, I think helped him. I think Joey Porter Jr. would have been pretty good from that spot as well, but that's pretty much all that he played when as an outside cornerback. And because of that, there were times where you could beat him towards the inside. It was difficult, but you could do it. And what that usually took was him getting into his fall step, his come to balance step. It was towards the outside to really get straight across from the receiver, and then the outside, and then the receiver could take a strong outside jab and get him to take that extra step. Then you could force his feet a little bit too far apart, where all of a sudden that come to balance step, now he's a little bit out of balance, and when he has to open back up inside, now he has to use kind of a little bit of an extra high knee to do that, and then he could give up some room inside. That's one of the ways that I saw him beat. Or you take a look at a game like Washington State. You had him come to balance, but then you had a hesitation release. I tend to see, and I don't know if this is normal or not, but like Jeff Okuda, or when you're looking at the Lions film from last season, a lot of times guys, when they're beat on these slants inside, comes through the hesitation releases, but you have him come to balance, then the receiver hits him with a hesitation release, and on top of that, he times it really well with his hand usage to allow himself to separate from Christian Gonzalez, and then he's able to make a play, and then he's able to create that space underneath. It's not going to be easy to go beat with a weak release off the line of scrimmage, okay? You're going to have to be crafty, and we know in the NFL, majority of top receivers are going to be pretty darn crafty. That being said, to my last point, it's very difficult to shift his weight, okay? Now, occasionally, and I shouldn't even say occasionally, at times, it's kind of rare, but you can open him up. You can force him to clear his hips just a little bit prematurely, and again, you can open him up then inside and create a little bit of that space. But it's very difficult to shift Christian Gonzalez's weight. It's very tough to get him off balance in that sense with your release off the line of scrimmage, because he plays so low to the ground and he does not pop up throughout his rep, and he keeps very good balance. It's tough to shift his weight, which makes it very difficult to shake him and also get a step over top, because he very quickly can then transition and get in your hip and run with you. So he's very tough off the line of scrimmage in that sense. You have to be very crafty and you have to be very clean. Now, to that, hand usage. I love the active hands that he plays with from a press alignment. Talk about maybe getting a little bit predictable. If a receiver tries to beat him a certain way, you usually get the same kind of response from Christian Gonzalez. But with that being said, his active hands are shown off. You see certain releases where switch their feet off the line of scrimmage, open up, use that inside hand stab off the line of scrimmage, and that's usually pretty darn accurate because of how low he's still playing at that point in time. But he's also very active, and probably the biggest thing that I love is that he's not really relying on his hands. So while he's very active with his hands, just because he does not get connection doesn't mean that he had lost the rep at that point. He doesn't kind of lean on his ability to get contact and control the route that way. He plays more so with his feet. But what's nice about this, you're talking about a guy that's 6'1.5", 200 pounds, that wins with his feet, in my opinion, more so than he does relying on his ability to gain that connection. So you will see false stabs off the line of scrimmage, false jams where he'll kind of just show it, but he'll still stay in his stance, and it doesn't force him to commit either way. He just kind of shows it, gives some eye candy to the receiver, but very active throughout the route. As soon as they open up, he takes his chance and he'll put his hand out there, but at the same time, it doesn't completely throw him off if that does not gain connection. He can still stick with you even when missing that. Now, to the point that I just made against Washington State when he was open inside, he really needed that inside hand to help himself open back up inside. But with that being said, I really like how he utilizes his hands. It's a little off topic, but as much as he plays some of the inside release, you do give him credit because he's not getting eat up, towards the outside. Certain landmarks, things like that, it makes sense. But a play like this, you kind of just see the athleticism where you get him to declare a little bit here as the receiver kind of takes that 1, 2, 3, then jab back inside. That gets him to open up because usually about that second, third step, now he's actually going to commit and start to open. So while he looks like he pops a tad, he still is low enough where he's able to keep his feet on the ground, reset himself, and position himself back in a spot where he's not completely giving up the inside. My biggest knock from a press standpoint with his hand usage is not necessarily the accuracy, but more so the fact that he doesn't affect the receiver enough with it. When he even gets a clean punch on a receiver, it just doesn't affect the receiver enough. It doesn't throw him off the route enough. And I think part of that plays into one of his biggest knocks as a whole, probably his biggest knock to me, is overall the play strength that you see that he has. With a guy of his size, he looks a little bit smaller than that. Now, I don't want to say smaller as much, so he looks just a little bit more linear. He looks slimmer than that. He doesn't pack a lot of punch, and there are legitimate questions within his play strength. Now, that can be improved, but there are questions there. We'll revisit this. I want to now transition a little bit talking about him from off coverage, because again, this plays into his strength really well because of his movement skills, for his ability and his reactive athleticism to sit in off coverage. This is where it translates really well. First off, he plays in half turn with ease. It is so smooth, it's so fluid. His ability to break down out of a half turn technique, whether that's off band or that's even in zone coverage, it is so darn fluid. His ability to break down and match a receiver at the top of the route is so clean, and it allows him to change direction so well. And we'll talk about the zone side of that in a second, but I think there was a great example against Colorado where you saw his ability from a half turn to see the quarterback look his direction, flip, then from that half turn, find the receiver and ultimately make a play on the football. But he does it with ease. That's the biggest thing. It doesn't look like he's pressing to be able to change directions in that situation. It just looks so fluid and so smooth. And honestly, I think the issues that pop up more so there is less about his athleticism and more so about his route anticipation, if anything. But to that, off coverage, playing in half turn, he is very smooth in those situations. A play like this speaks to his movement with ease. So here they had a motion and the linebacker took the flat route. Look at the movement there for him to just flip his head around and get in the way of the quarterback, Stetson Bennett. So he took away the passing lane, literally forced this to go elsewhere by cutting off that route as he wasn't matched up anywhere. He'll give you some things now. I think a lot of this is more just a defense that they play, but at times he'll get up to the line, he'll show you that he's going to bail out, and then as soon as the ball snapped, he'll square himself up the receiver. Sometimes that can, give quarterbacks problems. There was a great pass breakup. I think it was against Cal, maybe not. You'll see the clip. But he showed that he was going to bail pre-snap. There was a motion, so it probably shifted the coverage. He squares himself up the receiver at the snap. It allowed him to much easier break on the football and actually make a play on the ball. But he did that right before the snap, and you get, glimpses and flashes of him doing that, giving you a different look at the snap. I think more so he does it for the quarterback than the receiver, but that could be something that's added to his game, is where you can kind of throw off receivers by giving them a different look. Where his quick feet show off so much here is because of the usual low pad level, but he's so quick and twitchy that he doesn't have to overcommit from off coverage. He doesn't have to quickly make up his mind that I got to dive there and completely anticipate, leading to situations where double moves can get him over top because he's completely anticipating. There are flashes with a lot of corners where they have to anticipate, and that can lead to big plays, and that's fantastic. Anticipation is great, but occasionally you'll get him beat over top because they have to kind of sell themselves out. They have to say, I got to go because otherwise I'm not going to be able to make a play on that football. He is quick enough and twitchy enough where he's always ready, always playing on his toes. He doesn't usually need to overcommit in that sense, and even so he can recover pretty well, but he doesn't need to dive. So because of that, you have examples like the one in the red zone where he can kind of get up on it, but then still be able to turn and locate and get himself in a position where he wasn't bit on that double team. It just does not happen because he's not really forced to, because athletically he can jump on routes from off coverage because of his athleticism. We'll get back to the route anticipation in a second because I have some to add to that, but I think where you have to talk about the play strength is at the top of the route, but also at the catch point. And I think honestly for Christian Gonzalez, it shows up more so at the catch point than it does at the top of the route. I mean, occasionally against bigger receivers, more physical matchups, you will see that. I thought Georgia was a great example. Some of the more bigger physical receivers could separate from him at the top of the route. They could just kind of play through his body and he couldn't really hold up extremely well there. But he's not so slim and he's not like 5'9", 170 pounds where it's every matchup he's having these issues. It's just specific matchups where it shows up more than others, which is good, but it still shows up. And I think the biggest issue that you see with this is at the catch point where his play strength issue shows up. It's not necessarily that he can't find the football or he doesn't know how to make a play on the ball. It's more so that he gets separated from with the little, push off at the top of the route, and it's way too many contested grabs that he allowed. Like, he contested so many of those tough catches that you saw where at a point there I was like, man, some of these are just like, I mean, they caught it, but that's not easy. Like, the accuracy, the window the quarterback has to put it in, the adjustment the receiver has to make, he's challenging it. He's challenging the heck out of these, but he's also still allowing way too many receptions here, and a lot of it came from at the very catch point where he would be separated from. And this is more so when he's trying to match in man coverage, but he would just be separated from right at the catch point with a little push off, whatever it may have been, nothing too crazy. Sometimes he simply boxed out. That happened against Georgia where he was on the route, but late in the route, he gets boxed out in position where he can't get through the receiver to make a play on the football. You can obviously set yourself up a little bit earlier and that can help him out, but that clearly shows up to me as his biggest issue is just simply the route strength. Now, what I like about him in terms of finding the football on the top of the route is he consistently squeezes routes towards the sideline. He's very proactive in that sense to get himself in a good position early, meaning that he doesn't get called for many flags because he often gets his eyes back to the football. He finds the ball based on the receiver because he squeezes the route, receiver peeks back, now he's able to find the football. And this didn't just show up on the outside. That also showed up when he was lined up in the slot as well. So he finds the football pretty darn consistently, and he contests a lot of passes with pretty good arm length, but it's just too many receptions that he allows when he's still contested on the receiver. But he does force the quarterback to be accurate in that sense. Now, when we did see him make plays on the football, as you saw from the stats there, it usually happened in zone coverage, and you saw sometimes that pure fluidity that he had, the ability to change directions, jump a pass. He seems to have pretty good hands. Now, there was the one example, and this could again come back to play strength, even though I thought he was in a weird position where he did just get the ball ripped from him. Like, it was probably the biggest reception I saw him allow. Maybe there's another one that's a little bit bigger where he just didn't know the snap happened and it gave up a reception. That's why the stats are kind of what they are. I mean, stats are, you got to watch it because there was a reception, one of his biggest receptions that he gave up where the snap happened and it was fooled everybody on defense, and he was looking at the coaches and the guy took off, scored like 40 yards out. But there's also a reception where he was in a position on top of the route to break on it. He had his hands on it, but the receiver basically just ripped it from him and he picked up like 50 yards, something like that. For him, contesting, you're usually going to get a guy that's going to contest. But are you always going to get the plays on the football? Not the same as I saw with Joey Porter Jr. Now, he has good hands, which I like that, but he also plays some more zone coverage, which I think led to some of the more interceptions. I think it also shows his upside because athletically, a lot of times he just positions himself so darn well, and it's so fluid and it's so hard to fool him when he's dropping from a half turn that he can just find the football and track it with ease. But at the same time, it's finishing the play in tight quarters where you can have issues, especially against specific matchups, which could give him problems. Now, shifting the zone coverage really quickly, again, just kind of gave him a lot of love here. The promising side of this, I think it can be improved. Like, he moves a lot better than a lot of guys do when they're dropping in the zone, when they're dropping out, when they're in the half turn, the ability to break down, right? Finding his blind spot, being able to either, cut that off with his back, flip his head around and find the receiver. But instead for him, it's almost a route anticipation based on the situation, based on the alignment of the play, where you just don't always see the kind of awareness of anticipating that this is going to happen. Like, okay, they're probably going to do this. Like, there's some good examples where a receiver will hit his blind spot, so it'll force him to kind of adjust, and then they'll break off of it. Or when the quarterback's rolling to his side, and he allows it to kind of just sit underneath and break down right in front of him. And it's like, there seems to be some lack of awareness at times there in terms of just anticipating what the route is going to break into based on the situation that is at hand. And I think if that improved, he would be even more of a playmaker in zone coverage, because I think that's where honestly the biggest issue shows up beyond anything, is that occasionally you get yourself in bad spots, but more so than anything, just some of the lack of route awareness and anticipation that could be happening and coming his way. What I do like about him in zone coverage is his experience. He's played in so many different types of zone coverage, really every zone coverage, right? Cover 2, cover 3, cover 4. And what biggest thing on top of that is also that he not only played in all these types of zone coverage, just sit in his same spot over and over and over. He played in zone coverage in a lot of different positions because he also lined at slot. And because of that, you would get him play in a cover 4 and be one of the 3 underneath defenders. You get him in cover 3 and he'd be playing the flat on the outside. You'd get him in a cover 2 and he'd be the invert, corner sack. So he'd drop into the safety alignment. And the weird thing was, he looked sort of natural. Like Joey would drop into cover 2 invert and he'd become like kind of the safety on the play. And sometimes it just didn't look like it fit his skill set the best. I'm watching him and it felt like he kind of knew where the holes were in the zone. He had the movement skills to not look completely out of place. Now, I'll point this out now. This isn't specifically a zone thing. It actually shows him up more in man to me. But that's, again, kind of the awareness, and he can be easily preoccupied, meaning, like, if a receiver just runs him off, and even if it's very lazy, he'll still focus on that and not necessarily have attention to, they're setting up a screen on my side, they're trying to run it my way and just take me out of the play. So just having that awareness, maybe outside of the play, just kind of that natural instincts, I think may be lacking a little bit. So he had tons of experience in tons of different types of zone coverage. And what I liked is he didn't just feel like he was covering an area. He felt like he understood sort of where the holes were. There was communication pre-snap. Felt like he knew where the holes were. If a receiver jumped into that area, he would cover it up. He wouldn't just let it happen and kind of just sit in his zone. I really liked, honestly, his zone feel, and I think on top of that, the experience that he had is going to be something that's going to translate pretty darn quickly. Now, speaking on communication, I thought for the most part, there was only maybe a couple of plays where I could have noted the communication wasn't great. One play where he and another guy basically covered the same player when there was a motion away. Usually it came with motion where you had some communication questions where they literally covered the same person. You could tell he was trying to communicate with him. They ended up covering the same guy. And there was another one where he didn't seem to communicate with anybody, but maybe he just knew that, and he didn't have a matchup because he looked like he knew he didn't have a matchup, and he dropped his sticks and, shut down a play, but he wasn't actually covering anybody. Aside from that, you did see a guy that would communicate pre-snap, try to let people know where he was going to be, and I didn't see a lot of coverage breakdowns in that sense. Now, I do like the situational awareness, maybe not always the route anticipation, but where the sticks are. And I think this shows up more as a run defender, but it did show up that one time in coverage, which I noticed specifically where he dropped out, didn't have a matchup, but he actually brought down the running back short. He basically just dropped to the sticks a little bit beyond, but not too far beyond, understanding the situation. Run defender, it's a weird mix as a run defender to me personally. The first thing is the biggest thing, I don't think he's a tone setter. He's not the kind of guy that you look at and you say, man, that guy he's a dog on the outside in terms, and that's fine. You're a corner, you don't have to be, right? You got to be reliable, the biggest thing there. He's not a tone setter defensively, and there was a great example where I was a little bit disappointed. I think it was against Washington, and they were in their own end zone, and he was blitzing, and they brought the safety over to cover his guy. So it was a blitz. But he didn't really attack through the running back. Instead, he kind of broke down into it, went to his knee, and just wrapped. And because of that, running back actually got out of the end zone. I felt like if he would have just ran through the running back, because there wasn't really a threat of the quarterback taking it to worry about, if he'd have just ran through the running back with that mentality, I thought it would have been a safety. That was the one player I was a little bit disappointed. In fairness to that, here's the most physical play I thought I saw. Still a little bit late recognition, but this time he actually ran through that tackle and hit the receiver. Do that while he's not a tone setter, he's not a completely unreliable run defender. I kind of got the vibe early. I was like, oh, he might miss a lot of tackles. He didn't really miss many tackles. To that, his length is very beneficial. He changes up his approach to runners based on situation, also who he's trying to tackle, but there isn't much of a I'm delivering the tackle. It's almost more so I'm a little bit along for the ride. His biggest tackles usually came from he would dive at ankles and dive at legs, and it was weird to me how little of missed tackles he actually had. Almost more so his missed tackles came from missing it in the backfield off a blitz rather than missing it in terms of when he had him squared up. He tackled tight quarters, low, kind of just dove for it, and in the open field you would occasionally get some wrap-up tackles. The only thing is he just does not it's not like he's hitting the guy. It's almost like they're hitting him, and he's just kind of there, and he's just kind of taking it, and he's like, I'm going down with him. I may not back him up. He's going to fall forward, but I'm going to hit the guy, all right? I'm going to be in a position where I'm going to usually make the tackle. Now, in terms of setting the edge, setting contain, I thought he did pretty well with this. I don't love the fact that he doesn't really attack blockers too often. I feel like he's just getting blocked up, and he could do a little bit more there. His play strength is a little bit of a question, though, to that. But I liked, for the most part, where he really didn't give up the edge. He's very aware of the quarterback when they had an opportunity to take off, if that was potential. He would move around, mix himself around to try to get himself in good angles, one in open space, one on an outside run, but he wouldn't play through blockers extremely well. And then again, back to the kind of thing that I thought was a little bit of a disappointment is he blitzed a lot, but I think he was super impactful as a blitzer, right? I mean, when he blitzed specifically against the run, there were way too many times where I felt like he was a little bit more conservative. He was too conservative attacking for what the role was. I mean, maybe they were teaching him to do it that way, and I guess that's fine. But otherwise, it was like, dude, just go make the play. And he would kind of come in, and then he'd kind of break down a little bit, and he was a little bit hesitant. I get it. But at the same time, then there were times where the running back would just completely get out of the backfield. He wouldn't even make the tackle. He was like too late to get in there. Or he'd focus on the quarterback and something would pop out. It was just, there wasn't enough negative plays based on the blitzes. There wasn't a great return on that. You weren't getting a great return because the majority of the blitzes I saw were against the run. And there wasn't a great return in terms of when we blitz him, good things happen. They usually didn't seem to be the case. He wouldn't give up the big play, I guess, but he also wouldn't give you the negatives on top of that. Just to flip it a little bit, let's go to some of the slot coverage work because he actually didn't look terrible from this. I don't know if I think he's a slot corner at the next level. I wouldn't say that. I think he can stick on the outside, but I do like his feel based on what the coverage is. He has a really good sense, I think, for coverage, right? If they're in two-man and he knows he's got safety over top, he's going to completely adjust his game. But because of his movement skills, you also get a guy that's willing to keep an eye on the quarterback, match the route at the same time from the slot position, understanding there's safety over top, not overrunning it as a safety over top, but also kind of matching the quarterback with the receiver, at least early in the route, not throughout the entirety of the route. Once it got, through the stem and into the break, he focused on the receiver, but he was able to kind of match it early in the route and just keep an eye on where the quarterback was going, just in case, the quarterback would try to hit him with something quick. Now, I did feel like he was a little bit more committal when he was matched up in press with a receiver that had a two-way go versus a receiver on the outside who he could kind of sit heavier leverage and force to one side of the field, because that's kind of how he played it. When you had a slot and he had a two-way go, I felt like he was a little bit more committal. He still had a great recovery ability, but he could be opened it up a little bit more than he could on the outside. So definitely looked a little bit more comfortable on the outside, but he didn't look out of place when he was lined up in the slot. Oh, now I do got to add back to the blitzing point one little thing. I think he could do a better job, and again, this is the nuance that I said the same about him in coverage, but I think he could do a little bit better job of not showing it. I think at times you get a guy that kind of shows that he's blitzing a little bit too much, and there was actually one point where the receiver pointed out and he did blitz. He just shows it a little bit too much, so just being a little bit more nuanced with that. I think there's little nuanced things that could be added, because while he's played a good amount, he still is a very young player that has a lot of that I think he can continue to add to his game. Now, back to that off-man point really quickly. One thing that I loved is he's very willing to get up and squeeze the route. I think part of that's also the understanding that he can open himself back up, recover, and not get beat over top, just trusting himself. And I think to that, it allows a lot of upside within the zone. Now, I think it is interesting that he basically lit up Colorado, who's his former school, and some of the passes weren't great. But the athleticism that he showed, a little bit of improved route anticipation, I believe, and he could be even better in this area. Overall, this is a super fun player to watch because athletically he is so gifted. He's got good size. It kind of feels like what his weaknesses are. But some of those you feel like, man, we can really improve upon this. We can get him stronger. But a lot of the key traits, his athleticism, his speed, he has pretty good ball skills. He feels like he could probably fit into a lot of different types of schemes. But I think there's definitely things that need to be added and improved upon if he's going to continue to play press man. But I think a biggest part of that he needs, which is just the patience and the footwork and that kind of thing in press, it feels like he has all of that. It's almost more so the biggest question I have is the play strength within his game, and that knocks into a lot of different categories. And he did play a lot of inside leverage. While I saw him play straight up at times, he played a lot of inside leverage. And I do think in a sense it definitely helped him, especially against stronger, more physical receivers, that if you're sitting on, straight up or on the outside and they can make it a little bit more of an even match attacking you inside, some of the play strength and just kind of being bodied there could be an issue. But when he's sitting inside, he's basically able to almost cut those off and then lean on his athleticism and quickness and speed. That way he can kind of just work himself to the outside if they try to release outside. So it played into his strengths really well, and that'll be something that you have to question when he comes in. And also some of the games that he played at slot, he looked super natural, so the versatility's there. But I do think helped him, and in the NFL, you're not going to consistently do that based on the team that you go to and how they want to play it, right? At the same time, you know, if you're in cover one, whatever that is. So there was a ton of inside leverage that he played, which is also something a little bit that I do question. It seemed like it was his best fit for him was to sit on the inside, but I think you have a guy here that can probably play all those different types. So for me, I like the player. He is a fun watch, and he feels like he's going to come in and probably be pretty darn impactful right away. Like, I think he's going to be very good. He's probably going to be pretty darn good right away. I mean, you're probably going to get a year one legitimate impact player. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. That is Christian Gonzalez. Again, the final grades will be up on DoseOfDion.com, so you'll know where I rank all of these guys eventually, but keep an eye on it because it will be updated. Thank you, Brad, for watching, and I'm out.